The Spinoff Podcast Network.
Hey Atlanta, say hello to Small Business Help from Apple. That's right, we're here to make starting and running your business simpler. From helping you choose the right devices to setting them up hassle-free, we can help you build your business in no time. Speak to a business expert and get the help you need at no cost whatsoever. At Apple, we're open for your small business. Go to apple.com/small business or visit an Apple store to learn more.
Does your brand have something important to say through meaningful messaging that reaches the right audience? At The Spinoff, we work closely with our partners to create bespoke campaigns that bring value to both your brand and our audience. If you're interested in learning more about partnering with us, email Beck, that's BEC, at thespinoff.co.nz.
No mai hoki mai ki a the fold, e mihi ne ko Duncan Greive tōku ingoa. Just a quick note, this episode was recorded, part recorded in our studio by my guest, but also my end of it was recorded at home because I'm a bit unwell right now. It's also why we're a day late, but hopefully not $1 short. So forgive me if the episode sounds a bit different. My guest today is Liam Rātana, who is the Ātea editor here at The Spinoff. We're here to do a bit of a deep dive into the state of Māori media and with particular reference to some major changes that have been announced at Whakaata Māori, which is the major sort of state-funded Māori channel in this country. Liam kind of will go into more detail about this, but basically they're getting rid of their last daily news bulletin, Te Ao Māori News, which has been going out at 4:30 p.m. for 20 years. And it'll also be moving its Te Reo channel to a purely online distribution from next year. Now, there's an underlying driver to this, which is the previous government announced $10 million a year in new funding for Whakaata Māori, but it was time bound. So effectively it expires soon. And after that, there isn't going to be more. So there is as Liam refers to it, a fiscal cliff underneath this, but it's also part of a bigger story, which is about the sort of end of linear television and how to respond to that for news organizations in a digital environment. It's interesting, right? Because a lot of the challenges of Māori media are similar to those in kind of more mainstream outlets. And the Te Ao News is, it's a discrete story unto itself, but it's also the 6th daily news bulletin to be axed this year alone. We started the year with 8. I think we're going to end the year with 2. So it just kind of gives you a sense of just how fast this thing is moving. So basically, a lot of this is about audience shift and where do you build to kind of go and meet new audiences. Do you build on social media? Do you build on your own platform? If you build on your own platform, how will you get people to come? Is the old content form, the old approach of someone in a suit behind a desk, is that still optimal in this environment? There's just so many questions which naturally flow out of that. So even though the sort of the fact of 27 job losses and the end of a bulletin that was absolutely part of the furniture at Whakaata Māori, it's a big deal, and it's really hard for those going through that transition. There is a case to be made that this is Whakaata Māori doing something that that they're actually getting out ahead of many others in local media in terms of the truly committing to a digital first process. So we dig into that. We also look at Te Māngai Pāho, which is it's a similar organisation to New Zealand On Air in some ways, but its foundational mission is to kind of keep Te Reo Māori alive, and news is just one of the vehicles it has to do that. And we look at Whātea News and some other Māori news organisations and see which ones are kind of best adapting to the same challenges that Whakaata Māori and news more generally are experiencing. It's a really interesting dive into what is in many ways a similar but very different in other ways parallel news media ecosystem that sits alongside the one that we typically discuss on this podcast. Liam is someone who consumes a huge amount of Māori media, has strong views on it, has worked at Whakaata Māori and just generally knows the space as well as anyone. So yeah, really, really interesting and I think timely look into the changes at Whakaata Māori and Māori media more broadly. So this is Liam Rātana on The Fold. Kia ora, Liam. Welcome back to The Fold.
Kia ora, Duncan. Thanks for having me. Nice to be here.
So I wonder if you could start by just top-lining what's going on at Whakaata Māori at the moment.
Yeah, so obviously we've just had an announcement last week about some job losses and ongoing restructuring happening at Whakaata Māori. So they've come out saying that they are cutting 27 positions and sort of confirmed what they had earlier alluded to about taking their daily news bulletin online only and sort of continuing this digital transformation that has been underway for a considerable amount of time, if I'm honest. But yeah, they've finally confirmed that, as well as a few other things that had already been alluded to, like reducing the number of senior execs from 7 down to 4, which includes transitioning or transforming 2 of those roles into new roles as well. So yeah, obviously a pretty big loss. 27 people is quite a significant amount of staff. I think it's almost a quarter of the staff there at Whakaata Māori. So yeah, it's quite big news. And
because they haven't necessarily made it clear whether there are going to be, they're moving into trying to do more digital first news, which is like the same as it ever was, in terms of legacy institutions moving into that realm. But have they made it clear about how many they might rehire or what the shape of a new digital first news service looks like?
That level of detail is sort of lacking at the moment. From what I can gather, it's 27 people have definitely, those positions have been axed, and it's unclear as to whether or not any of them will be rehired at the moment. The other thing that I forgot to mention briefly before also is that they're transitioning the Te Reo channel to be an online-only platform, which had already been announced, but they're speeding that up to March 2025, so next March is when they want to achieve that by. So quite a rapid sort of decommissioning, I guess, of that linear channel and turning it to an online only.
It's weird because you have to sort of set some things aside to be able to talk about this. I mean, the loss of jobs for people impacted is always inherently awful, and the loss of a bulletin for people who view it is a big thing. But in terms of the actual underlying strategic argument about going to digital and given the demography of their audience and so on, what do you make of that?
Yeah, well, I just want to acknowledge first that it is pretty awful, obviously, having worked at Whakaata Māori during its arguably sort of glory days at Newmarket. I know that Whakaata Māori is a really tight-knit unit, and especially in the newsroom, people will be quite devastated and really hurt and upset by these losses. But I think to sort of get our heads around what's currently happening, it's good to sort of step back to what happened during COVID, especially when Whakaata Māori and its Te Ao Māori news offerings sort of arguably peaked. In December 2019, they saw a 300% increase in their audience engagement, so with its Tapatahi news bulletin. And so this was during the beginning of COVID-19, and Whakaata Māori decided to extend its 6:30 news show into a 60-minute bulletin from 30 minutes. And At the same time, it also announced that it was going to start implementing its second phase of this digital-first newsroom transformation. So at that point, Whakaata Māori had Te Ao Tūroa, which was a twice-daily 5-minute Reo Māori news bulletin, Te Ao Hurihuri, a twice-daily 5-minute English news bulletin, Te Ao Tapatahi, a half-hour live-to-air bilingual news program every weekday at midday, and Te Ao Maramo, an hour-long Māori language news program every weekday. So there was a lot going on at that time. And Whakaata Māori was seeing that big pickup in its news offerings. However, as we know, COVID and the lockdown sort of fizzled out, and subsequently the audience numbers for the station's news offerings slowly began to drop off. And this in turn led to sort of the silent axing of quite a few regular news and current affairs offerings that Whakaata Māori had. We saw long-time broadcasters like Neil Waka and Kawe Rose depart the station. And so it was sort of a sign of what was to come. And so that's led to what I think we're seeing now with, this recent release. Whakaata Māori says the decision to discontinue its traditional news bulletin reflects a strategic pivot. Arguably, that pivot has been underway for some time, and we had the sort of blip in its strategy, arguably, during the COVID peak when its news offerings were seeing this big pickup. But now it's maybe making a correction, to borrow a stock term, to where it was heading in the first place. So yeah, I mean, this is something that has been going on since I was at Whakaata Māori some years ago. At that time, they sort of implemented a midday online news bulletin that lasted for a little while. Then that dropped off, and then it came back again. Every day at 4:30 p.m, I get notifications on Instagram saying that Te Ao Māori News is live. And they've finally, in the last 12 months, or 12 to 24 months, they've launched their teaonews.co.nz website, and they've finally created a Māori Plus TV screen app for your smart TV, which was always a thorn in my side of not being able to just go onto my smart TV and go onto the Māori Plus TV app, but now I can, so that's really cool. But yeah, I think this is all a response to the station's research, which is showing that there has been a significant migration of its viewers, especially in that younger demographic, from traditional linear television across to the digital mediums, which is no surprise. And this is something that we talked about a while ago with the Where Are the Māori Audiences research. We saw that transition happening. And so, yeah, this is it following its trajectory that it had set for itself some time ago. In the 2024 annual report, Whakaata Māori said it saw a significant 32% increase in digital traffic and an 8.4% growth across all its platforms. So social media engagement was arguably skyrocketing, particularly on Instagram. During days like Waitangi Day, it was peaking at over 490% during these sort of key events. So yeah, I think all in all, Whakaata Māori is trying to reallocate some of its resources from, the heavy lift traditional news bulletins across to enhancing their digital presence. And by doing so, it's aiming to, engage these audiences more effectively and ensure that there is some sustainability of its Māori news offerings and content in what is, understandably rapidly changing media environment. So it's going to be an interesting 12 to 24 months for Whakaata Māori, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's a difficult one, right? Because, and TVNZ is undergoing its own version of a similar kind of problem. Puts a lot of its newsroom resource into making a 6 p.m. bulletin and less of it towards making kind of a digital first offering. And, in some ways, this is Whakaata Māori getting out ahead of that, definitively saying we can't continue to create that bulletin in the same way that we did while also, moving into the future. You just have to be confident that you have the personnel to create that news. Do you think there's a risk in sort of, if you move at the scale and pace that they have, that they could not necessarily have the personnel to kind of deliver on the, that sort of joined up digital offering that you describe?
Yeah, I think it's a double-edged sword, right? Like they have to, because they're facing this fiscal cliff that we haven't really talked about yet. But if you look back to 2008, as I understand it, their baseline funding for Whakaata Māori has not increased since 2008. So with this $10.3 million fiscal cliff that Shane Tonema says that they're facing, they've had to do something quite drastic in order to be able to keep operating as, well, not as they are, but, they've had to pivot and transition quite quickly. So if they have the ability to deliver what they're aiming to do is yet to be seen. But yeah, they've been forced into this position because the coalition government hasn't indicated that they would be supplementing this $10.3 million time-locked funding that the previous government had allocated in the budget. And so that sort of forced this drastic change. I think the other side of that is that they were already heading in that direction, like I said before. And so it's sort of just getting them back on that digital transformation path, which, isn't pretty because, there's 27 people who now are out of work. But it's sort of, it's the path that Whakaata Māori was already on. It was what they were hoping to do. So it'll be about whether or not they've got the actual plan in place in terms of what it looks like once they get over or get through this review period and begin, I guess, the new phase of what Whakaata Māori is.
It's interesting, right? Because, as you just described before, that their Instagram audiences feel very strong, and you see Moana Maniapoto's interviews on TikTok regularly, just kind of exploding there, kind of more so than most mainstream interviews in some circumstances. That feels in many ways like a place that both for younger audiences and for a broadcaster that doesn't necessarily have to bring people to its own platform and rely as heavily on advertising income as the likes of TVNZ. It feels like a sensible strategy. The tension obviously is that you're building on a Meta-owned property or a ByteDance owned property. What's your kind of analysis of the quality of the way that Whakaata Māori shows up on those platforms, and is there disquiet about that tension of you're building, but it's not, they're your own channels, but they're not your own platforms?
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest issues that Whakaata Māori is facing, is that they've got this awesome social media presence, but it's only, for a 10-second TikTok, and then people keep scrolling and they don't go to that platform like you're saying. And so I think they're really struggling to figure out how to bridge that gap, that disconnect between getting eyeballs and engagement with their social content and how that leads to people actually clicking on a link and going to their platform to keep viewing this content that they're engaging with. It's great that they're getting it out there and people are seeing this content, and it's obviously good for their social channels, but what does that mean in terms of meaningful engagement? I think the idea of meaningful engagement is sort of for a news organisation or a television station, it's probably more than just a click on social media or a like on Facebook, like you say, or double tapping on Instagram or TikTok. It's how many minutes people view this content on the platform. So that's their main challenge, as I understand it at the moment, is figuring out how they bridge that gap. And I think they're trying to do that by pivoting to more live content as it happens on the ground with reporters, younger reporters who are more able on social media, who can go live quite quickly when news is happening. And we're seeing other Māori news agencies or outlets as well really excelling at this. So Whakaata Māori, I think, is at the moment trying to figure out exactly how they can drive people to engage with their content in a more meaningful way than just on social.
In general, I mean, you referred earlier to sort of glory days at Whakaata Māori, which implies that they were once and are no longer. What do you think has sort of driven that? And look, to be fair, that could be true of a lot of different news and media organisations, legacy institutions. But why do you think there has been that sort of sense of it being less central to the kind of the culture of late?
Yeah, I think there's been a transition away from linear television first and foremost. Obviously, we're seeing the demographics change and people aren't consuming linear TV like they used to. When I was a kid at high school, Homai Te Paki was a sort of staple in Māoridom. Everyone watched Homai Te Paki or Sidewalk Karaoke was something that sort of came along a little bit after that. And these were television shows that we engaged with because linear TV was still quite a popular platform at that point in time. I don't think Whakaata Māori has a digital-first equivalent to Homai Te Paki nowadays, or a television show that's driving engagement, or a set of television shows that are driving engagement like those TV shows used to back then. They had Code, which was another sports talk TV show, which was really popular. Hunting Aotearoa was really popular. They had a whole, a whole offering of highly popular linear television content that for some reason they haven't been able to replicate as they've made this transition towards digital content. I think the closest that they've got to it at the moment is probably Ahi Kāroa, which is sort of a digital first, drama that has done really well on its in its engagement and its pickup, and it's got a set of loyal followers and fans who engage with it and share it and talk about it, and that's done really well for them. But besides that, I'd say that Whakaata Māori has struggled to replicate that early success it had with the linear broadcast, and that's likely led to some of the issues it's facing now.
Just before we move on from Whakaata Māori, I just wanted to get a sense of, from your perspective and people you talk to, how much of that is this is just a really hard job for anyone versus it being ultimately a verdict on Shane Taurima's approach and leadership of the channel, because he's sort of driven a relocation of the studio and ultimately these kind of strategic decisions do tend to feel like, rightly or wrongly, they're tied to a CEO's ability to kind of execute a transition like this.
Yeah, I think Shane came in at a difficult time with COVID, happening. Again, the baseline funding hadn't increased in over 11 years at that point in time. So, and there was already a digital transformation plan underway, being implemented. So he jumped in to steer the ship when it was arguably already, on rocky ground. That being said, he's had to make some pretty tough calls, and I feel for anyone in that position, but also that's the job you take, right, if you're stepping into that role. What I've noticed is that under his leadership, Whakaata Māori has really tried to adapt rapidly to this evolving media landscape, whereas before it kind of perhaps felt like it was paying lip service to that or trying, but didn't really have a clear vision or plan in place. Arguably, it might not still have such a clear vision or plan in place, but it feels like there are things happening quite quickly to get Whakaata Māori to where it needs to be. He's had to make difficult decisions, job cuts, program cancellations. These, reflect the complex landscape that he's trying to navigate right now. What I will say is that this period of transition at times has definitely felt drawn out too. They've made announcements years in advance in some cases about things happening, and then it's taken quite some time to confirm what the details of those announcements are. And so that's not going to be good for morale amongst the workplace. People have been upset at, some of these processes. We had the head of HR leave, who had only been at Whakaata Māori for around a year during this most recent review. So, yeah, there have understandably been some people in Whakaata Māori who have been upset at what's happening and the way it's been run. But on the other side of that is you're always going to have people who aren't happy with how things have gone. I think that's just the natural part of what happens when you have to make these tough decisions, right? But at the end of the day, if you're facing a $10 million fiscal cliff, what are you going to do? You have to do something drastic, and you have to do it relatively quickly. So all in all, it's been a pretty hard time for everyone at Whakaata Māori and media in general. So yeah, I think Shane has remained quite transparent. If I think back to the tangihanga of Kingi Tuhei Te Apotatau Te Whiro Te Tua Whitu, he, during his whai kōrero there, Shane sort of alluded to the fact that there were more changes coming, quite drastic changes at Whakaata Māori, but the vision remained the same of being a platform that promoted Te Reo Māori and really tried to advance Te Reo Māori as a language for all of Aotearoa. So that core vision remains the same. It's what Whakaata Māori exists to do. But yeah, it's just been a tough ride for the last couple of years, like for most of us.
The other big Māori news service is Whātea News, which has got a kind of different underpinning in some ways. But could you just sort of break down how that works and kind of give a sense of whether that as an alternative approach to trying to live in both a legacy and a digital space offers some kind of clues as to, whether there is a better approach through the way that they've done, or if they've got similar kind of struggles?
Yeah, so Whakaata Māori used to be funded through Te Māngai Paho, which is the Māori commissioning service. Their budgets were split out, and so Whakaata Māori received its own budget, and Te Māngai Paho had its own commissioning budget separate to that. And so Whātea News is funded by Te Māngai Paho, so its funding sits separate to Whakaata Māori. So Whātea Radio or Whātea News is quite different because it's one of the 21 iwi radio stations in Aotearoa, but it has the largest news contract awarded to any one iwi station in the country. And that's because it produces news bulletins, hourly news bulletins for all of iwi radio. So those news bulletins are recorded by Whātea. Scotty Morrison does most of them. And then they're sent out to all the iwi radio stations and played out on the hour, every hour. Now that has been something that other iwi radio stations have found quite controversial, or some of them haven't been really happy about the fact that Whātea News records or gets all this funding to produce this product that arguably any iwi radio station could produce. And again, it could be more iwi specific. I, as we've discussed before, I listen to the AM radio on my way in Whātea News. It's my local, I live in Mangere and it's down the road. But sometimes the news is very, very general, or the sports bulletin will be a one-liner about the All Blacks or something. And so arguably it's not a really high-quality product that iwi radio stations are receiving for the amount of funding that Whātea News is getting. And understandably, that upsets some of them. And we've seen some iwi radio stations or some groups and regions join together. So Ōkaha News is one news service that comes to mind that serves sort of the central North Island, Whakatane, Rotorua, Taupo area, and Tainui. And so they produce a really high quality news product. They do receive some funding, but it's not as much as Whātea News is getting. As far as I know, that could be different under this most recent round of NCA funding from Te Māngai Paho. Up north, we've seen Te Hiku Media join forces with the likes of Radio Tautoko, Ngāti Hine FM, so the three most northern iwi news stations, and they're producing quite a high-quality product. But again, if they were to get some of this funding that Whātea News was getting, they could probably produce an even higher quality iwi-specific or region-specific news product.
Yeah, it's interesting, right, because it kind of points to, again, another of the big challenges of media more broadly is that as the kind of the country's journalism capacity overall gets hollowed out, you get more centralisation, and you just start to miss stories that are local. And to arguably having a national Māori news service when you've got very geographically dispersed populations, almost if you could come up with some combination where people had a bit of capacity in each of the stations plus a national service to supplement, it might be the most desirable way to kind of approach that. But you still have the problem of digital audiences who are, again, largely distributed. How does Wātea show up in digital context?
I think they're slowly transitioning into what a digital world would look like for Wātea News. At the moment, it's not as high quality as we might expect. That being said, they're making an effort, and you've got things like they did a pre-debate special for the David Seymour helmet Modelic debate where Matt Tukaki and a few others were there. He's interviewed Don Brash and live streamed that. It's clear that they're making an attempt. They've got some young people in who go to events and are live streaming from there and doing live updates and reporting. But I think there's still a very long way to go for the likes of Wātea News in terms of their digital transition. It's not pretty, and it's sort of something I think in Te Ao Māori we go, oh, that's just iwi radio, and we sort of shrug our shoulders and we don't necessarily expect a high quality product from them. But we have the likes of Tahu News down in the South Island, we have Ōkaha News, we have Te Hiku Media, who are producing quite high quality products. And I can't say this for sure, but I don't think they're receiving anywhere near as much funding as Wātea News is receiving for their bulletins. Just looking at the recent round of Te Māngai Pahu NCA funding, all of those news outlets, all those products that I've just mentioned are specified in there as receiving funding, but we can't see how much. So it's hard to say how much money they've been given compared to the likes of Wātea News.
So, I mean, it's interesting because you'd hoped for a greater level of transparency there for all parties involved to be able to kind of, even as you say, just to kind of assess the quality on a cost basis. Thinking about the Te Māngai Pahu funded content, especially in the current affairs space, I know that you're a big consumer of that slate. Is there someone that sort of stands out where they kind of really feel like they're nailing this sort of digital side?
Yeah, so when it comes to news, I'd say Ōkaha News is up there. Tahu News has a really nicely polished product from what I can see. I'm not massive consumers of them because I'm not from those regions or areas, so their news isn't as relevant to me as Wātea. I live in Māngere, Wātea Marae is down the road. Or Te Hiku is where I come from, so I engage with their content. So I think they're examples of news outlets that are doing things really well. I would like to see more of it, so more resources being put in there, more journalists covering a wider range of topics and rounds to sort of increase the amount of content that they do have. But I think that they're really trying hard to figure out what iwi radio news offerings look like in a digital world, digital first world. Yeah, so those are two examples. As I said before, we've got the likes of Ahi Kāroa as a scripted drama series that's doing really well. They put their stuff up on the websites and they have phrases that they put up and they do really well on social media too. And so they've sort of figured out a formula to make a drama series digital first well. But there's just not really that breadth of content out there at the moment that's catering to all audiences and the things that we might want to consume.
Because if you look at the, what Te Māngai Pahu funds, the likes of Te Karere, Marae, Mata, there's quite a large slate. It looks outwardly more similar in terms of its kind of construction and distribution like a linear type slate, in that it's shows that have a particular cadence to them versus the kind of the classic digital first offering. As a again a consumer of those shows, do you feel like Te Māngai Pahu as an organisation and expressing itself through what it funds that they are part of the issue in terms of, whether you can be either at a brake or an accelerator into these kind of digital forums, but the fact that nominally contestable slate can feel like it continues as it does. Yeah, is that part of the issue, or is there a kind of is it important to have these very historically important, some of them shows that have been around for decades, that they be given the opportunity to kind of recontextualize themselves in this new environment and era?
I think what we're seeing is the same, but trying to dress it up differently. So the likes of the Hui, which I'm not sure if it receives TMP funding or not.
It does.
Yeah. So we've got like the likes of the Hui, Mata. They might live stream on Facebook, but it's still a linear product that they're just chucking on Facebook. They're not engaging with the audience in any way. They're just broadcasting their linear television on social media and saying this is our digital first approach, which doesn't necessarily work, right? It arguably is just saying it's just an easy way for them to justify to Te Māngai Pāho that we have a digital first strategy. We're putting our recordings up on social media, and it might get really low engagement, but hey, we tried, right? This is our digital first strategy. And for us who do consume this stuff, we can look at that and say, well, no, you're just putting a TV show on Facebook and trying to say that that's a digital first strategy. Or we can look at the likes of Something for the People, which is a podcast that's recorded by Whakaata Māori, and it's an hour-long, completely into Te Ao Māori podcast, and they engage with their followers on social media. They do quizzes, they have questions that they answer, and they're engaging really well. And we're seeing that engagement from Reo Māori speaking audience is really high for them. And they've had, I think, 3 seasons now. Maybe they're in their 4th season, or they're recording their 4th season. So that's another example of a show that does really well. But there definitely seems like the sense that Te Māngai Pāho is happy to just fund shows that they've already funded, that they know that they can see some sort of return on, or that they feel comfortable in the product that they're going to receive for that. And those products tend to feel like linear first, or definitely a linear type product that is being produced by people who have these relationships with the funders. I'm not going to single people out, but if you go to any of these hui, you will know the people that tend to ask the questions, that tend to sort of push some buttons with Te Māngai Pāho, and then you can see in the announcements that they get some of the money as well, a lot of the money, and it tends to be the same people, same TV show, same product that gets funding year in, year out. And then we've got the likes of, no, I've got nothing against it. I think it's a great show, but Origins, Scotty Morrison, their product, they're $1.4 million for 2 episodes, which is just a mental amount of money. And I know that it can cost more to produce a similar type product, but we had a pitch in, for a very substantially less amount that didn't receive funding, which would have produced, I think, 40 episodes for a digital-first podcast, and we had a whole digital-first approach and style to that. So, yeah, it can be sort of disheartening as someone who's pitching for these things to see that Te Māngai Pāho is saying, and these funders are saying, we want digital-first content, we want you to show us your strategy for making your content shine on social media and on digital platforms, and then they go and fund the same 5 TV shows that they've been funding for the last 10 years or whatever it is. They have their place, and I think they're really important, but I also think that they know that the audiences are slowly dropping away, and that if they don't pivot or figure out how to champion their stuff online quickly, then it's going to be really, really hard to continue justifying funding them at the same levels that they're currently getting funded at.
It's interesting, right? Because, if you spend any time on Instagram or TikTok, it's kind of impossible not to be served a bunch of content that is wildly popular and feels like there are Māori creators who are just extremely adept in these environments, but the funding bodies feel slow to embrace that kind of kinetic with a community kind of the back and forth that is inherent to those platforms. Do you see this kind of change at Whakaata Māori as having potential to be the beginnings of that channel saying we have to leave the old ways behind and move into this era, or do you still feel like there's kind of more needing to be done in terms of properly embracing new audiences, new creators and new approaches to really, because there's so much opportunity in this moment, right? And yet it doesn't feel like it's necessarily being grabbed by some of the institutions that have the opportunity, almost have are mandated to do so.
Yeah, I think Whakaata Māori is quite far along the path now, and this is sort of the last hill that they needed to get over before they start really transitioning quite rapidly into a digital first world. And it's sort of what's the word I'm looking for? It's sort of the last battle, for lack of a better term, that they had to face in enacting this linear bulletin and saying, no, we're only going to make our news online now. And so I think Whakaata Māori is arguably ahead of the likes of TVNZ, which is still producing the 6 o'clock news, One News. Are we going to see One News act in the future? Potentially, probably, maybe one day. But Whakaata Māori has just axed their linear bulletin. They don't produce linear news anymore. So I think this is not the canary in the coal mine, but this is telling of where Whakaata Māori's at right now compared to the likes of TVNZ. I think we're seeing Whakaata Māori saying we have to do something, we have to be more inclusive, more dynamic, we have to move rapidly if we want to stay relevant. They can see that their relevance is leaving and they're losing, that ability to capture a younger audience like a lot of linear outlets. And so this is the beginning of their new future, really, their new normal. Whereas, we've got other broadcasters, other stations that are perhaps still holding on to the past and struggling to sort of let go and fully embrace a digital first future.
Well, we'll see in the coming months and years whether it's successful. Thank you so much for coming on the fold today, Liam. Really appreciate it.
Cheers, Duncan.
Kia ora, I'm Duncan Greive, founder of The Spinoff. You can help us keep all of The Spinoff's award-winning journalism free for everybody by becoming a member today at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
Kia ora, I'm Alex Casey, senior writer at The Spinoff. We wouldn't exist without the ongoing support of our generous members. If you're able to, you can make a donation at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
The Spinoff Podcast Network.